Hello, everyone. My name is Daniel Moyer. I'm one of the sales support trainers here at Briggs Stratton Energy Solutions. And today, we're going to talk a little bit about the future of the grid, specifically net metering. We're going to talk a little bit about net metering, NEM 3.0 in California, but a lot of what the topics we're talking about today do apply to other states where we're starting to see more people adopt net metering that's not as favorable as we'd seen in the past. Couple of housekeeping items. The Q&A is active. Please go ahead and put your questions, your comments, whether or not you have net metering in your states in the Q&A, and we'll address them as we go along. Additionally, this course is NABCEP accredited, so if you're looking for your continuing education credits, you're in the right place. We're going to go ahead and have my email pop up at the end of this talk, and we'll go ahead and issue you the credits. Please email us your full first and last name, and then we'll get you those credits as well. So let's jump right into it. One of the things I always like to talk about is upcoming events. RE Plus Texas, this is one of those RE Plus regional shows. These regional shows, I really like them. They're more intimate. They're an opportunity to meet and greet a little bit more. If you're going to be there, please stop by. We're going to be at booth 524. Rodolfo, one of my coworkers, will be there. Let me know, and I'll make sure that Rodolfo has a special gift for you when you get there. So what is NEM? What is net metering? What is NEM 3.0? Really quickly, we'll just kind of set the stage of the basics right here. In the center of the screen, we have an inverter. Now, Briggs & Stratton products are DC coupled, so we keep DC stored in the batteries, like all batteries, but we don't have an inverter specific to every battery stack. The batteries are then fed into a hybrid inverter. I'm showing on the screen a solar inverter, which we really like. Hybrid inverters were kind of created by Solarc, and they're one of the leaders in the hybrid inverter market. But there's others out there that we're partnering with, like Solis, MegaRevo, GrowWatt. It's kind of the hub. That's where the transfer switch is. That's where the monitoring control is. That's where the load output is. That's where the generator would be fed into. And that's where the AC coupled solar could potentially be fed into. What we're going to focus, though, today on is this arrow right here. Historically, if you just have solar, you're just going to be feeding solar into the home, first feeding any home loads that are on at that moment, and then back feeding the rest to the grid, building up your credits. So that's why this is a bi-directional arrow. What we're seeing now with the loss of these net metering policies that give you that one-to-one credit, this arrow really is only going to go in one direction, and that's from the grid into the inverter, into the home loads when the solar and storage aren't able to keep up. So that's kind of the key here, and that's the takeaway of today's talk. Another thing I really like about Solarc is their ability to pull in generators. With the automatic two-wire signal to start, we can start up a generator based on the state of charge of the battery and charge up that battery while also supplying the home loads, run the generator at its most fuel efficient point, save on those run hours that would require more maintenance, and also, I think most importantly, save on the noise associated with those generators. So absolutely bringing that in as well. Again, setting some of the basics here, what we're going to talk about is partial home backup and whole home backup. Now, if you are going to use solar to charge up your batteries during the day and not send that power to grid, you don't necessarily need to have a whole home backup architecture to supply battery power to all of the home loads. Using CTs, we can put CTs in this main panel and then be able to measure how much energy is being consumed by these loads, and then tell the solar to discharge itself, not only to supply any of the backed up loads that are downstream of the inverter, but also start to feed back power to the main electrical panel that doesn't exceed the loads that are currently on. So yeah, you're still backfeeding onto that tie-down breaker at the bottom of that load center, but we're only going to be sending back as much as the home loads are consuming. So we're not really going to be sending any back out onto the grid here. So with the whole home architecture, which is really, I've seen a lot more people move to, mainly because of more powerful inverters from companies like Solarc, especially that Solarc 15K that you see on the right-hand side that has that 200 amp pass-through, but also less expensive batteries that are more powerful, that are more reliable, like the ones we sell here at Briggs & Stratton Energy Solutions. So let's just set the stage here. What is net metering, right? Net metering is the policy, the agreement that you have with your utility company that governs how they're going to compensate you for your solar production that exceeds the home loads that you send back out onto the grid. Traditionally, you get a one-to-one credit. And I always remember when I would ever sell solar here in California, if I ever put somebody's solar on, say in the fall, and they would start they would start consuming power from the utility, and every month they would start to get kind of that bill showing them where they're at on the annual true-up basis, and they would start owing money and owing money. And I would have to let them know, look, by the time spring and summer rolls around, you're going to start to build up those credits. And then ideally, if I've sized the system correctly and the homeowner hasn't changed their behavior or added any loads, really you should have a one-to-one true up. The utility shouldn't owe you anything and you shouldn't owe the utility anything, other than maybe some of that interconnection fees where they just charge you maybe $10 or $20 a month just for being connected to the grid and the use of their power lines. But there's been a change, and their change was essentially there's no longer that one-to-one net metering. Now you're essentially getting paid a fraction, at least in California, of what the value of that solar was at a retail rate. When the moment you inject your excess solar into the grid, you're getting paid the wholesale rate for that electricity. So what do we have to do? What we have to do with those lowered compensation export rates, we now need to store that solar excess energy that's not covering home loads during the day in batteries. So you can see a couple graphs here during the day, right? Sun's up in the middle of the day. We're powering all those home loads, and we're also generating this excess. What we need to do now is to store that excess solar energy into a battery and then discharge that battery in the evening, so that we're doing everything in our power to not consume electricity from the grid and doing everything in our power to not export electricity to the grid as well. So there can still be some opportunities to save money without storage, right? So there's sometimes what we do see is, especially with homeowners, I would imagine like a retired couple, it really depends upon your lifestyle. Maybe you are just at home during the day. Maybe the air conditioners in your home are chugging along during the day. And in the evening time, you go to bed early, you don't have many lights on, the air conditioners start to shut off. Well, the solar power was covering all those home loads during the day. Most people don't. Most people's production profile of their solar and their consumption profile doesn't necessarily line up. So really what's happening, like in my family, for example, we're all at work during the day. We're all going to school during the day. And then we come home in the evening and start to cook dinner, turn on the TV, all of the lights come on. And that's really when we would need that battery power to be stored at our home and be able to discharge to our loads during that time. So again, what's also contributing to this is the time of use. Now, out in California, when you went solar, you were forced onto a time of use rate. And if anybody is not familiar with the time of use, essentially during certain times of the day, and also during certain days of the week, electricity is less expensive during what they call the non-peak hours, which is usually the morning to the afternoon. And then you start to get these partial peaks or the peak hours, usually from 5 to 9, 4 to 7. We actually had an opportunity to choose some of our time windows depending on which time of use rate you are. So that's crucial though, and that's another reason why I've seen a lot more arrays being a west-facing array. We're trying to capture that sun and produce get the production from solar later into the day to try and match up that consumption profile with their production profile. So this is on the right-hand side is right out of John Cromer's training. Solar has a number of trainings on this kind of topic. And you can see, right, without anything, you're paying the full electric bill. You do go solar, yeah, you can see some return. And then, but really to see the maximum return, you're gonna have to provide the solar plus the batteries is gonna give you that most of the return. It's kind of hard to believe it's been this long, but 30 years that we've had these net metering policies in place. Net metering 1.0 came out in 95. And really the goal of these net metering policies were to drive the adoption of solar. And if anybody here is on the call that was doing solar in 95, put in the Q&A, let me know what kind of solar panels were you using? Were you using some old Arco, maybe some old Evergreens, and maybe also put in how much you were paying per watt for some of those solar modules. But it was there to drive the adoption of solar. Batteries really weren't a thing then. Well, they were lead acid batteries then. 2013, NEM 2.0 came along. And really, it was very similar to the concepts laid out in NEM 1.0. There was little changes. Now they had an interconnection fee. There's, like I mentioned, putting you on the mandatory time of use rates as well. So this is a great diagram here I found on the NREL website, and it kind of talks about solar being fed down into a home, first powering the home loads. Any sort of excess would be sent back out to the grid, and you would have a one-to-one credit. This blue line represents you importing electricity, usually during the night or during the winter when the solar production isn't able to keep up. So what you were getting here is this green, which is the self-consumption, the blue, which is the importing, and then this yellow, which is you sending power back out to the grid. And the concept here is that it was bidirectional. So you get that one-to-one credit, and it was credited in kilowatt hours, essentially. Now it's changed. We've gone to a net energy metering to a net billing tariff. Now, I'm not sure why NREL did this, but there's usually only one meter, not two separate meters like you see here. What happens similar, right? The solar's producing, it's powering the home loads, it's being sent back out onto the grid, and then when you consume electricity, it's coming back off the grid. The difference now, though, is that you're being compensated at the wholesale rate of the electricity the moment you inject it into the grid. And I got some numbers coming up here to show you just how little that can be. We all know how expensive the importation of the electricity. Here in California, 30, 40, or even 50 cents a kilowatt hour during some of those time of use rates is possible and has happened. So we went from a net energy metering, that one-to-one credit, back to a net billing tariff. And like I mentioned, it's at that sell rate the moment you inject it into the grid. So why did things change? And there's a lot of, there's always two sides of the story, I guess I will say. And a lot of the utilities like to blame ducts. And the reason they blame ducts, or at least mention the word duct, is the duct curve. And what you're seeing on the right-hand side there is back, and you can see through the years, what it's showing you here is basically the load on the electrical grid. And as the years progressed, you can see throughout the summer, during the day, so many people had solar panels that were injecting power into the grid that basically the price of electricity went negative. And what that means is, you know, you have solar, maybe you drive an electric car and you're feeling good, you're feeling great about it. What happens when you come home at night and you plug in that electric car? Your electric car isn't being charged by your solar, it's basically being charged by some peaker plant or some power plant that's been sitting idle all day that now needs to ramp up and provide the power for our homes when solar isn't producing. So the utility will say that they were having to raise the price of electricity for everybody to do this. The utility will say that it wasn't sustainable. And in some ways, I do agree that you couldn't just have unmitigated, intermittent power supplies. We really needed to have a solution to store this solar power when it needs to be used, not just when it's being injected into the grid. So I really see an opportunity for energy storage to come along. I see that we should not only use distributed energy sources, storage sources like on our homes, but also a combination of having utility scale storage as well. So that was really the argument from the utilities, that the people that couldn't afford to go solar were having their prices raised for electricity, because all the people, rich people who could go solar, did, and were getting an unfair deal, and they were really disrupting the grid. So one of the things that I did with this kind of talk is I'm part of what's known as California Solar and Storage Association. And if anybody on this call is in California, I really encourage you to join the California Solar and Storage Association. If you're not in California, there's many other sister kind of organizations that do very similar work. What they're doing is they're helping to lobby the lawmakers that are implementing some of these policies on our side, and not necessarily having the utilities in all of the politicians' ears. It could have been worse. It's hard to imagine, but they could have, for example, and they're trying to do this, get rid of the grandfathering of all the people on NEM 1.0 and NEM 2.0. That's still a very constant battle. So please support your storage and solar associations wherever you may be. But what I found is this great article from CalSA that talks about the debunking the myth that going solar was costing the state billions of dollars. So the Public Accountability Office made a lot of assumptions that, right, that the customers that use their own solar panels should be counted as a cost to all the other utility customers. I guess the best way I heard that explained is, imagine you grow some potatoes in your garden and you don't go to the store and buy the potatoes. Well, should the store that didn't sell those potatoes be counted as a loss to them? Really, in a lot of ways, we need more generation, not less, to meet our electrification demands. Also, what happened is a lot of the solar companies have been going out of business or really struggling in California or other states that are starting to adopt net billing tariffs. And guess what? Those solar companies were the companies that were installing batteries. So if you got these companies going out of business, it's who's going to now put in the batteries. It's really kind of hindering the adoption of batteries when it was starting to take off as well. Of course, it's not really alignment with our clean energy goals. And it's not true that the poor people were not getting solar. It was just starting to become financially viable. And there was a lot of programs and opportunities for people of low income to start to obtain photovoltaic systems. And now really with net billing tariff, you're going to have to add storage to it, which really drives up the cost of it as well. And earlier I mentioned the idea of distributed storage, the idea that we have batteries on all of our houses. And yeah, we're still connected to those transmission lines, but if I have excess solar and I'm feeding back to the grid, I'm not sending it across the city or across the state. I'm probably just sending it right into my neighbor's yard. So I think they were really undervaluing the opportunity for that transmission locally, not necessarily saying you're using our transmission lines as well. I also think that they're not valuing the land that these power plants would otherwise be using if we didn't have solar plus storage. So really what we need is more of a balanced approach. And if you want to read more into this, everybody on this call is going to get not only a copy of this recording, but also a copy of the slide deck, and you can read a little bit more on some of these other topics as well. So we'll just take a moment here to talk a little bit about what's changed over these different net metering. So NEM 1.0 and NEM 2.0, and then the net billing tariff, or essentially NEM 3.0. Well, the import rate, right? We talked about this. With NEM 2.0, you got forced onto a time of use rate. The net billing tariff, you got still put onto a time of use rate, but what's known as the electrification rate. Going down to credits, right? Of course, we were getting paid that 1-to-1. Now you're getting paid the price of what the wholesale cost of electricity is as well. The non-bypassable charges, this is kind of essentially a little bit of the solar tax that we've always kind of heard about. And really, one of the other big changes between the three is, let's go down to the billing and true up. Under NEM 1.0 and NEM 2.0, it was an annual true up. Now with NEM 3.0 or net billing tariff, it's really a monthly true up. And what you would do is then have to pay that difference the month to month. But credits will roll over for that. In a lot of ways, I kind of like that because it forces the customer to kind of true up every month, and then they're not left with the kind of sticker shock if a system wasn't sized correctly or if the home's loads increased, and then they see a big bill at their true up period as well. Another thing that changed a little bit, and I really like this, is at the very bottom now, is that you can actually oversize the solar. Now, under NEM 2.0, I believe they let us get away with this a little bit. I think we could do it 10%, but look at that. Now you can oversize it by up to 50% as long as the customer promises that they're going to get a heat pump, maybe an electric car, or maybe a hot tub or something like that. So it does allow us to oversize the systems a lot more. A lot of graphs. You can tell I'm really liking these graphs. North American Clean Energy is the one that put out this, but again, it just kind of goes to show, right? The midday energy exports are worthless. We are, consuming here a little bit, but really what's happening is by the time the sun sets and you start to consume electricity because the solar is no longer producing, it coincides with those time of use rates where electricity is the most expensive. And how much do you get paid? This was right off the California Solar and Storage Association's website. If you'd like to join, please scan that QR code right there. What this is showing us here, and these are updated every year, and I should probably update this. This is, I think, from 2 years ago here. What you're seeing here is on the top is the different months of the year. On the left-hand side are the different hours of the day. And you can see right in April and May, we're not getting a lot. Essentially what we're getting is less than 1 cent a kilowatt hour if you inject it back into the grid. What everybody always notices on these, and if you look at some of the more up-to-date ones, it's not so quite striking that they've spread it out a little bit. But what this is saying, in September, around 8 o'clock, if you inject electricity into the grid, you get $3 a kilowatt hour. And if you are charging that battery with renewable sources like solar, you are indeed allowed to discharge your battery to grid. You can't charge the battery with grid and discharge to the battery to the grid. But if you charge it up with solar, absolutely you can. So I think it'll be fun to see this, everybody programming their batteries to do this. And I'll show you here in a minute how some of the controls in the solar actually do allow you to inject all this power to the grid. One other thing, really, can't stop reinforcing this enough, is there's resources available. What you're looking on the right-hand side is the Net Metering 3.0 resources from CalSA. So there's all these different documents and diagrams and FAQs that talk about all of this for a lot of the different utilities, right? Southern California Edison, Pacific Gas and Electric. Another benefit, really, and I promise I'll stop talking about CalSA after this, is they have a permitting hotline. So if you're an installer and you got an inspector that's giving you grief about something that you don't feel is right, call up this permitting hotline. Dara Young, who's one of the permitting experts at CalSA, will get on the phone and help set the record straight for everybody. Again, there's the QR code. I encourage anybody who is not a member, or maybe your membership has lapsed, to please consider renewing. So, talked about it just a second ago, but inside the SolarArc, not only on the app, the My SolarArc, but also on the screen of the SolarArc, you can adjust how and when and how much you send back to the grid, and you would use it on the grid parameter screen under the limiter. So again, what it's kind of showing here is, 6 to 8 p.m., right? The PV to grid, it can be worth a lot, or even the battery to grid if we're able to charge up that battery with PV. So all of this can be programmed. And then what you can additionally do is, set the reserve. Don't discharge the battery completely. Maybe after the nighttime peaks are over from time of use, let's use the grid when it's cheap to charge up some of that battery so we have a 20% reserve. And so if the grid does go down in the middle of the night, we can go ahead and use that little bit of 20% to get us through the next morning when the sun will come up, and we'll start to be able to run the home again. Another thing, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, is the idea is maybe we should start adjusting the direction that our solar panels face. Now, somebody who's been in this industry for a long time and primarily off-grid, we always face our solar modules south, right? That's when we're going to get the most amount of sun hours during the day. But what if we start to think about it as we're not looking to try and get as much kilowatt hours or as much energy out of that solar panel, but what we're trying to do is get the most value of that energy out of the solar panel. And the most value for that is when we can self-consume that electricity. If we can self-consume it, we don't send it back to grid, and we don't really even send it into the battery at all. We just use it right there. So Aurora Solar and Open Solar, they're solar proposal tools. They have a lot of great tools, and they've become very advanced to try and model all this. Imagine that graph I showed you a second ago with the different price of electricity for every hour of the year, and then layer that on top of the different consumption profiles. Like I said earlier, my family's energy consumption might differ from somebody else's, not only in the amount used, but when we use it. And that's why uploading interval data into these Auroras, into these Open Solars are so crucial. But what we're looking at here, this kind of dashed blue line here is somebody's consumption profile. This dark line here, that's somebody's production of their solar panels. And then these color overlays, what this is talking about here is the blue is self-consumption. The light blue is us exporting. This kind of peach color right here is us self-consuming during peak times. And then really what you can see here is this little sliver right there is us exporting during peak times. And if you do the math down there and you're looking at that, you can see the idea is that if we can optimize and shift the production curve to better align the consumption curve, we can save more money. That's really crucial. And another way to think about this is not necessarily shifting our production curve to match our consumption curve, but what if we can adjust our consumption curve to match our production curve? And one way to do that is with load shedding. Now, the Solar 15K does have a load shedding panel. What that can do is it can actually turn off loads when the batteries reach a certain state of charge, or turn on loads when a battery reaches a certain state of charge. But there's also a lot of other companies out there, one being Lumen. And so what would we want to turn on? Maybe we have a hot water heater, an electric hot water heater. Once the batteries are full and the solar is still producing and the loads are all satisfied, and we don't want to start sending that power back to the grid, let's turn on an electric hot water heater. We can store all of that energy in thermal heat inside a well-insulated tank. There's an unlimited number of cycles in a water heater, essentially. Maybe we turn on an EV charger. Maybe we turn on a hot tub or something of the similar, like a real heavy load. And then what you can see here is how you can adjust the consumption curve to meet better with the production curve. And then on the left here, that's the idea that we're moving the production curve to match the consumption as well. Now, I'm joined today by Mike Schaefer. He's the other one on the chat. Mike, any questions that we have so far? Okay, not hearing any. Please put any questions, comments in the Q&A, and we'll address them as we go. A couple other things that we got out of CALSA right here is, and I get this question a lot, is say you want to go sell your house and your house has solar on it under the NEM 2.0. Well, do the new owners of the house get switched over to NEM 3.0? No, they actually don't. But what they do though, say the solar is got 10 years left on the NEM 2.0, and there's not many people with NEM 1.0 anymore. That's all aged out. They're going to basically inherit that same net metering policy for the next 10 years. So in this example here, what I'm showing is, they're 12 years after it got installed, they're going to get 8 more years on that NEM 2.0. Can you add a battery without losing your net energy metering status? Yes, you can. Is your NEM 1, NEM 2? A customer can add a battery without altering their NEM 1 or 2 status. I would say be a little careful though, if it's a leased system, you want to be a little careful. You might be voiding the lease if you start to add a battery. Can I add DC capacity to a NEM system without losing its status? Yes. So this is a little more tricky, but let's say you have an 8,000 watt inverter and you got, 8,000 watts of solar up there. You can add a little, maybe, and those inverters can take a little bit more. Maybe we add 2,000 more watts of solar up there. And now we're at a 10,000 watt array on an 8,000 watt inverter. That's okay. And you might say, well, why would I want to do that? Well, it's true that the output, the CEC AC rating of that 8,000 watt inverter is never going to exceed that. But if we add some extra solar, we're going to get more production in the morning, more production in the afternoon, and more production when it's cloudy. So overall, we're going to be producing more kilowatt hours. But it's true that the inverter is never going to output more than that 8,000 watts that it was originally sized for. Could have been worse. Please consider joining. So, the last thing I would think you would want to do is, and it's not so much recent anymore, is that we had a ton of customers that knew about this, that signed up before the NEM 3.0 went into effect. And we had a big backlog. We were about a year, and they allowed you to go past a year or so to get these installed even after. As long as you got the contract signed, I think you needed to have the permit, and you could still be under NEM 2.0. So what do we do now? We're not going to go to a homeowner and say, you missed the boat. You're going to be under NEM 3.0. You're not going to, nothing's going to happen. There's still possibilities. And this came out of Josh Brum. And Josh Brum is over at MK Battery now. He talked a little bit about this. He was at Solagent when I pulled all this. But it's really, have some conversations with the homeowner, right? Ask some questions, listen, and don't talk, write it down, and then come back at them with, hey, you mentioned this, we talked about that, right? So ask them questions like, how often do you have outages? What kind of a budget, right? Let them talk, and then we're going to figure out what customer we're dealing with. And Josh had kind of talked about these 3 different buckets. So bucket 1 on the far left there, right? They're only seeing solar and storage as a financial investment. They're not really concerned about outages. So we're not really going to talk about that a little bit. So what we want to do is probably just have a smaller battery bank. We don't need to have 3 days of autonomy. This isn't an off-grid person. This is just something that we want to have enough battery power, essentially, to get them maybe through the night or even just through the time of use times. We're just going to store up that solar, then discharge the battery for those high time of use. You're really going to get a really good return on investment. It's not going to cost as much initially, and it's just a smaller system. We're not really sizing for the entire year anymore or for the worst month of the year. I would just recommend a solar with the smaller battery. Bucket number 2, they still want that ROI, but they do have some occasional outages. So not necessarily a whole home backup, figure out what's important to them, right? Probably the internet, some lights, maybe keep the kids' iPads charged so they're not bugging you, but they still want that fast payback. So we're gonna still go with the solar, but we're gonna add a little bit of fuel in the tank, right? We're gonna add a couple more batteries. And then what are we looking at? Maybe accounting for some of the daytime loads and then subtract what we would be producing with the solar, right? What is the solar is gonna be producing during the day, helping out with those loads. Then all we need to do is calculate the daytime energy consumption minus what the solar is doing. Bucket number 3, this is I like this, what Josh said. This is I hate the utility person. This is somebody who essentially wants to be off the grid while on the grid. And I've been hearing this from a lot of people that they are just fed up with the utility. They don't want anything to do with it. I would encourage them to still be connected to the utility because there's still long winter days or long winter nights and really high power consumption sometimes if you got a big party. You're still going to need to use the utility a little bit. But what we're going to do is we're essentially going to size a solar 15K with that 200 amp pass through. We're going to size some of our 6.6 Briggs Stratton batteries. We're going to figure out the max kilowatt hour on the worst day, right? This is probably the Christmas, or maybe it's in the summer with the air conditioners. And really don't necessarily base it like you would average it for the entire year. What you're doing here is designing an off-grid system for somebody. And then of course, I would add a couple of days of autonomy as well. Don't necessarily have to go crazy with this because again, they'll have the grid as a backup as well. So these are the packages, right? Bucket 1, bucket 2, bucket 3. Bucket 1, remember, it was, I just want the fastest return on investment. They don't really need a lot of power. So solar 8K, usually a 12K isn't that much. And then even the 15K isn't that much more either, but we don't need a lot, right? If somebody's using just 20 kilowatt hours a day, 6 kilowatt hour battery will get them through those peak times. In the middle, managed power, that's a 2 stack of our simplified 6.6 batteries. And of course, the kind of I hate the utility is on the far right. I would be really curious though, a lot of our common systems we're seeing is that solar 15K, but actually 2 stacks of our 6.6 batteries for 40 kilowatt hours of storage. So some of my final thoughts before I show you some of the products, really, we needed these generous net metering incentives, right? This was what allowed us to create a huge solar market in California. But really, it's going to be up to installers and being able to lobby our lawmakers to make sure that it doesn't get any worse. It doesn't have to spell an end to it. By being able to pair solar with storage and that load control capabilities, we're going to be able to still see major returns, even under NEM 3.0. And be sure to mention that to the homeowners. Those companies like Aurora, Open Solar have very powerful modeling software that can take all this data. It's no longer just using the solar pathfinder out there in some back of the napkin calculations. Enter all this data and it's going to show you and model this for you and be able to tell we can still realize 8, 10, 12-year payback periods on these systems as well. Mike, any questions or comments so far?
No, Daniel, nothing at this time. You hear me okay?
Yeah, we hear you okay. Thanks, Mike. So what we're looking here on the screen is a solar 15K paired up with our 6.6 battery. And this battery is really quick stacking. Some of the things I really like about the battery, of course, is the look of it. You know, we're just there as installers and we throw it up on somebody's wall or in their garage and drive back to the shop in the van or the truck. The homeowner is going to have to be looking at this thing for years, and having something that looks nice, I think matters, and it does matter. I've heard it matter. You know, some of the other things as installers, what we care about is quick install. We have a rapid stack connector where not only the power, but also the communication is stacked throughout the stacks. And then on the top of the battery stack is the stack controller that has the status LED lights, which I still like. You know, it's sometimes hard to get everybody to use these apps that are coming with all of the products. If it still has a fuel gauge, they at least can go out there and look to see where their battery's at. It's not quite as fun as looking at a Trimetrics battery meter in the old Power Shack, but it still gets the point across. The battery does have unlimited, our warranty is 10 years, unlimited cycles at 100% depth of discharge with no throughput clause. There's some other companies out there that say, yeah, you got a 10-year warranty, but you only get this many cycles. You only get to put this much energy into and out of it. And you can only cycle it at maybe 80% depth of discharge. If any of those come up first, your warranty is voided. So we do still recommend an 80% depth of discharge. And you can see here what our expected cycle life is. Notice though that the depth of discharge is still 100% depth of discharge on both of these batteries. Now, back in my lead acid battery days, we were always concerned about depth of discharge. Never go below 80 or 80% depth of discharge, right? Leave 20% left in the battery. And what we're noticing, and Nathan, my coworker, can probably articulate this in physics speak better than I can, but the takeaway here is what actually causes batteries to age faster is the rate at which you're cycling or discharge, cycling either through charge or discharge cycle. So you can see the 6,000 cycles, right? If you divide that by 365, that's like 16 years, but that's a C/2 discharge rate, which means you can charge it and discharge it in 2 hours. And I imagine if you cycled it little bit slower, and most people do, especially when the solar window is a little bit longer than that, a lot of it longer, you're not really discharging the battery in 2 hours, you could expect more cycles. But if you're hammering on the battery and you really want to discharge the battery quickly, this is like an hour and 15 minutes, that 0.75 charge rate, you are going to get a little bit of a shorter cycle life, still significant. You know, I was down in NAPSEP and was attending a training, and we're talking about lithium ion batteries and their safety, and absolutely LFP is a safer chemistry than say the cobalt based chemistries. I will say though that the inherent safety of a battery shouldn't be judged solely by its chemistry. Here at Briggs Stratton Energy Solutions, we've done a number of things, and all of these batteries go through 9540A testing, which then helps informs our 9540 UL certification. There's other things like the battery management system, the way the wires are done inside, the way the case is constructed, the venting on it. So we really do have a safe battery. I would say that cobalt-based chemistries do still have a time and a place, especially in our phones, our laptops, or in some of our lawn equipment that we have a sister company here at Briggs Stratton that has battery-powered zero-turn mowers. Those are cobalt. We want energy-dense, lightweight batteries. We're talking about home stationary batteries. LFP really is the way to go. And that kind of brings me to another point is everybody always asks, so can I add batteries to an existing battery bank after it's been installed? And we'd always usually say something like, yeah, you can, maybe 2 to 3 years down the road, that's fine. Just know that the battery, the new battery, the warranty is going to revert back to the existing batteries, and it's going to work a little harder, and that's all true. But really, I would look at it kind of at a case-by-case business scenario where, say you have a battery bank that's kind of just sitting there, not really being cycled. It hasn't aged much, and you go and add new batteries to it. Well, those batteries that have been sitting there for 2 years, they're going to act like new batteries because you really haven't been using them. If you're going to be adding batteries to a system that's been charged and discharged daily and really working, then yeah, those batteries, the new batteries, are going to have to work a lot harder to help maintain the system. So I would look at it a case-by-case business. Please call us, email us. My email is going to pop up here in a second for your NAPSEP, and we'll talk you through each system as you look forward in the future.
Hey, Daniel, got a couple of questions coming in.
Yeah.
Great question from Phil regarding payback periods for a homeowner, especially if they change their usage patterns. Do we know of any modeling software that would calculate that payback?
You know, that's a good question. So Open Solar and Aurora Solar would do that. I guess is the question, you model it and you sell it and then they change their usage. Could you just go back and remodel it and see what it would be? But that's a great question.
Yeah, definitely changing their usage patterns was, I think, the heart of the question. We'll see if Phil sends in a follow-up. Jean-Pierre asks about if the batteries get underwater, will it still work? You know, how does water intrusion get handled through the stackable units, and what do we know about our outdoor rating as you're showing here?
Yeah, so the batteries are IP65, which I don't believe is the full submersion. And you know, we get this sometimes when we go down to Florida or you go down to some of these other places where there's flood zones, and by code you have to have these things up 8 feet on the wall. And then it makes me wonder, are there other conflicting codes when you have stuff that high up in the sky? You know, you can't necessarily work on it. I will say this: these batteries do not work underwater. I would imagine that if they do get submerged, that the battery management systems, the protections that are in the batteries, would potentially detect the short and then shut themselves off. But yeah, IP65 as well. Back to the comment on changing load profiles as well. You know, that could go two ways, right? Where somebody could potentially use more energy, which is really gonna, you know, drain the battery quicker. Like I said, you could always add solar. It would charge the batteries up, but if the consumption kind of happens at night, that might be a little harder. But in a lot of ways, the more, you know, if they have excess, the more power, especially when it comes to heat pumps, if you can remove yourself off of natural gas or propane is really expensive and just keeps going up and up. Sometimes actually adding loads, if the system's able to help it, increases the payback period. Or imagine you're not, you know, you got an electric vehicle, and if you're able to charge the electric vehicle when the batteries are charged and the solar is still producing, you're not out there buying $5 a gallon of gas. So we'll get back to you a little bit on that. And yeah, the IP65, which is, you can put it out in the rain. That's okay. You know, apparently engineering is, you know, taking pressure washers to it, and we're okay there as well. I don't want to necessarily focus only on the 6.6 battery, and knowing that is definitely one of our flagship products. We've had great success with it. It's been out for about 1.5 years. We have thousands of these batteries installed. It's very quick to install. It's very reliable, easy to integrate, but we still do have what I call legacy batteries. And those are the ones you see on the left-hand side. The first one I'll start with is our Phi battery. That one does not have closed loop communications. So if you got an old Xantrex or an old Schneider or some old Outback equipment that doesn't have a battery management system or equipment that's able to listen to a battery management system, there's no reason really to spend extra on it. So the Phi and the Amplify on the far left, the Phi on the far left doesn't have closed loop comms. So if you got that old piece of equipment, make sure you look through some of our integration guides. As long as you get the bulb, the float, the absorb, you know, disable equalize, set the charge, discharge currents correctly, you absolutely can use a battery successfully, a lithium-ion battery successfully for years without closed loop communications. Notably, that Phi battery on the far left is also available in 24 volts. You know, I don't always necessarily need to say it, but never run our batteries in series. Always run our batteries in parallel. So what that means is if you got a 48-volt system, buy the 48-volt battery. But if you got one of those old 24-volt systems and the equipment's still rock solid, you can definitely leverage that Phi battery. The Amplify battery, a lot like the Phi, 48 volts only, does have closed loop communications. That one comes with a 15-year warranty. Unlimited cycles, 100% depth of discharge with no throughput. On the far right, now that I just said that, you can run the high voltage battery in series. In fact, they're designed to be run in series. That's the only one you can do that with. Those are really more of a commercial. I'm not the biggest expert on those, but those pair well with high voltage inverters, especially like the Solar 60K or the Solar 30K that need those high voltage input ratings. Get this a lot. What's really nice about that Solar 15K is that it has a dual battery inputs. So our battery can discharge at 273 amps DC. And when I mean our battery, I mean a stack of three 6.6s, which comes in just under 20 kilowatt hours, a controller on top and a base on bottom. That's on the far left there. The Solar can take in 275 amps. If you were to just use one set of battery cables onto, this is what it looks like inside the Solar 15K. Each one of these battery breakers is only rated for 200 amps. So if you got one stack and you want to get more than 200 amps out of it, DC, you have to use these little battery combiners here. And what this does is essentially the negative and the positive land down here, and then that comes up into here, and then combines them inside. You could also, and I've seen this done a lot of times, is do a dual one-aught where you take two positives and two negatives off of one battery stack and feed it separately into the different bus bars here. What's also really nice is if you have a dual battery stack, like you see here kind of in the middle with two 6.6 stacks of three, what's really, you don't need that Midnight Solar combiner. You don't need that Victron combiner. The ability for the Solar 15K pulls it in right there. And we're seeing this a lot on the other hybrid inverters that are coming to the market where they have those dual battery inputs. Mike, any questions before we move on to generators?
Yeah, Phil did follow up with a follow-up question. I'll read it off, but if you pull up the Q&A, I think you can see the equation that he's looking at. He states, I'm thinking more along the lines of, if I install blank kilowatts of solar plus blank kilowatt hours of storage and use a remote controller to turn off my water heater every day from 5 to 11, how does that impact my utility bill? Can any software systems model behavior changes like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think definitely the first part of the question, if I install so much solar and so much storage, absolutely, right? That's of course what Aurora and Open Solar could do. I'd be curious, and we can reach back out, but I would also assume that Lumen might have some of those calculators, but we just got off a meeting with Open Solar. We're one of their partners. They are starting to pull this stuff in. So take a look at Open Solar. Andrew and Chris over at Open Solar, they're great guys, and look at that, because I know they're trying to expand some of the tools in there, not only to have a CRM and to get paid quickly, but also to be able to model these load shedding capabilities. And that's really key, is the ability to model it. So yeah, let's take a look. We'll take a look at Open Solar and reach out to them, or maybe take a look at Lumen, because that's Lumen's wheelhouse, right? They want to be able to show value with the load shedding capabilities. Absolutely, great topic.
That's it for questions right now, Daniel. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mike. We're coming up. We got about 7 minutes left, so keep the questions coming. Let me know. Did your state just get rid of net billing or net metering? Are you on net billing, or do you know of the next state to go? It's really key to understand some of this as well, and maybe let me know if you're still in a net metering 1.0. Briggs Stratton has a history of making engines, and we actually have been making engines for over 115 years. One of our engines maybe have been found in your lawnmower or in your riding lawnmower, but also our engines are used in our generators. So on our screen here is our generator lineup. On the left there is our air-cooled generators. One of the really nice ones I like is that 13K on the left. Now everybody's, that's the smallest one, but what makes that 13K so cool is that it's a vertical. A lot of times you have really tight lot lines, or you're really limited on where you can put a generator, and a 13K fits nicely with that front exhaust. And if you pair that with an energy storage system, like we talked about, you can run the generator and charge up the batteries. You don't necessarily need a very powerful generator. A lot of times these 26Ks, should mention the 26K has one of the best motor starting capabilities in the whole industry. but you don't necessarily need a big generator because you're relying on the solar to start up those loads. And really all you want as a generator is to charge up the batteries. But absolutely, we do make the more powerful ones. The 1822 are ones that actually have the EPA certification for off-grid use. And in a lot of ways, off-grid is where we've always seen these generators be used. 26K and the 22 and the 18 also have what's known as NG Max. So I didn't always realize this, and a lot of people probably don't, is that when you run, when we tell you it's a 26 or a 22K generator, that's on propane. But if you go to run one of these generators on natural gas, they derate. Well, we here at Briggs & Stratton have done some things to optimize the generator's performance, the ignition timing, the exhaust manifold, the intake manifold, so that if you run it on natural gas or you run it on propane, you're still going to get the nameplate rating that you see there as well. We also do commercial 30 all the way up to 200 kilowatts. All the ones on the left are 240 volt split phase, and those commercials start to get into the 480, the 208 three phase as well. There is some other talks. We got another talk coming up later this month where John Cromer from Solarc and Nathan are going to be talking about advanced generator integrations. We're going to jump into some of the use case scenarios of transfer switches, even in a system that has the Solarc, that has the the micro interconnection device, the transfer switch built in. But absolutely, we're still going to pull into that. I've down at Intersolar, down at RE Plus, at these trade shows, there are a ton of battery companies out there. There's a ton of battery companies that have stacking batteries now. So really, what not only sets us apart as that technology, but also our company, we truly have a global company with global resources. So we're able to have that American-based manufacturing. We're able to have American-based tech support, engineering, and really the kind of design these systems for the North American market. I didn't show it earlier, but that stacking 6.6 battery, it has a 2-inch conduit knockout. There's no these cable glands, other little things that we do to optimize these things for the North American market, because that's where we're headquartered and that's where we've been for the last century. A lot of different capabilities kind of spelled on the screen. Before we get to the email for your NABCEP certificates, if you are an installer, the first time you do a 6.6 install, we're going to give you $1,000 back. That QR code right there allows you to join our IQ installer program. So after you've done the first install, please consider joining. Not only will we continue to give you $100 off every battery going forward, but we'll also promote you on our social media. We have a little swag pack we'll send you, and we can also put you on our locator maps as well. There's the QR code there. There's the sales number right there. Please reach out. Thank you everyone for joining. If you need NABCEP certificates, energy storage training at basco.com, BASCO.com, or give us a call if you want to talk to one of our application engineers. But if you need that NABCEP certificate, please email energystoragetraining@basco.com, and we'll get you those NABCEP certificates as well. Thank you. Again, my name is Daniel Moyer. Thank you, Mike. Mike, are there any other questions before we close out? All right.
Hey, one last thing, Daniel, just to clarify, no other questions, but a comment from Mike Strawn, our instructor, that just a reminder that with the Power Protect 18 kW and 22 kW units, those do not derate on natural gas. So 18 on LP or natural gas, 22 on LP or natural gas.
Okay.
Thanks everybody for your time and attention. Daniel, I'll turn it over to you for final comments.
Yeah, thank you everyone. Hearing no other final comments, please keep an eye out on the upcoming trade shows, and we'll see everybody next time. Thank you.